If you see the way he was begging me. But it's not my fault. His friend has more money.
Aisha, I want to be like you. See me see trouble. Do you think you can do what I do?
On most evenings, when lectures were over and the sun had begun to fall behind the tall buildings of the university, students gathered in small groups around the hostels and walkways. Some hurried to night classes, some rushed to cheap restaurants around the school gate, and some simply stood around watching the social life of the campus unfold. But whenever Aishat appeared, something about the atmosphere shifted. Conversations slowed, eyes followed her, and whispers quietly spread through the crowd. Aishat was already in 300 level, and by then she had built a reputation that most students could only dream about. She walked through campus with effortless confidence, always well-dressed, always composed, always looking like someone who belonged to a life far more glamorous than the average student routine of lectures and assignments. Freshers admired her the most. To them, Aishat looked like the perfect image of what university life was supposed to be. She had money, she had influence, she seemed to know all the best places in the city. Some said she's a model, some called her a runs girl. Nobody really knew what was sponsoring her lifestyle. New students watched her the way people watch celebrities. Some of them quietly hoped that one day she might notice them. And sometimes she did. Aishat had a habit of spotting girls who were new to campus, girls who were still trying to figure out how university life worked, girls who wanted desperately to belong somewhere. She had a way of approaching them that felt natural, never too direct, never suspicious, just friendly enough to make them feel chosen. A compliment about their outfit, a casual question about their department, an invitation to hang out later in the evening. To most of those girls, the attention felt like a privilege because being seen beside Aishat immediately changed how other students looked at them. They suddenly felt important, connected, part of something exciting. And that excitement was usually enough to silence the quiet warnings that sometimes floated around the hostel corridors. Warnings that sounded vague and uncertain. Warnings that most people ignored because no one ever had proof. But there were always stories. Stories about girls who had once followed Aishat around campus the same way these freshers now did. Girls who had once laughed beside her in cafeterias, attended parties with her, and proudly posted pictures with her on social media. Girls who, at some point, simply stopped appearing. At first, their absence never seemed unusual. University students disappear from routines all the time. Some travel home unexpectedly, some switch hostels, some drop out quietly without telling many people. But occasionally, someone would ask a simple question. Has anyone seen her recently? And the answer was always the same. The last time anyone saw her, she was with Aishat. Yet somehow, nothing ever happened to Aishat. No investigations, no confrontations, no real consequences. Because rumors without proof are easy to ignore. And Aishat understood something very well. Confidence makes people doubt their suspicions. She carried herself like someone who had nothing to hide. She attended lectures normally. She laughed loudly with friends. She walked through campus in broad daylight like someone who knew the world was watching and knew the world could not touch her. And every few weeks, the pattern repeated itself. A new fresher would arrive on campus, curious, impressionable, eager to fit in. Aishat would notice her eventually. It always started with a small conversation, a compliment, an invitation, a promise of a night out somewhere exciting beyond the dull routine of lectures and hostel curfews. Most girls accepted without hesitation, because saying yes to Aishat felt like stepping into a better version of university life, and for a while, it usually felt exactly like that. The girls who followed her began to experience a life that looked far more glamorous than the one their classmates were living. They visited clubs most students couldn't afford. They drove through parts of the city that felt thrilling and unfamiliar. They began dressing differently, talking differently, acting like they had already outgrown the simple routines of campus life. To outsiders, it looked like they had simply joined Aishat's circle. But the longer someone stayed around Aishat, the more quietly they seemed to disappear from everyone else. They stopped attending lectures regularly. They became harder to find during the day. Sometimes they even moved hostels without telling their old friends. And eventually, in some cases, they simply vanished from campus entirely. Yet Aishat remained untouched by every rumor that followed those disappearances. If anything, her influence seemed to grow stronger. Freshers still admired her, still followed her, still hoped she might notice them the way she had noticed the others before them. And Aishat continued moving through campus with the same calm confidence, watching the crowd around her the way someone watches a field full of possibilities. Always patient, always selective, always waiting for the next girl who looked just curious enough and just naive enough to follow wherever she decided to lead. For Aishat, university was not just a place to study, it was a place full of opportunities, and the most valuable opportunities were always the ones that trusted her the most.
By the middle of the semester, Aishat's reputation had grown into something almost mythical on campus. Freshers talked about her in hostels late at night. Some admired her confidence, some envied her lifestyle, and others repeated the quiet rumors that followed her like shadows. But admiration always seemed louder than caution. And Aishat understood that perfectly. She knew that the early weeks of every semester were the best time to find new faces, students who had just arrived, still trying to shape their identities in a place that suddenly felt larger and more exciting than anything they had known before. She moved through campus with her usual calm, watching people the way someone studies a crowd for familiar patterns. That was when Jane first appeared on her radar. Jane was a first-year student who stood out in a quieter way than the other girls. She wasn't loud, she didn't chase attention, and she seemed more interested in her books than the campus gossip swirling around her. But like many freshers, she had begun to notice Aishat, and that curiosity slowly turned into fascination. At first, it was harmless. Jane would sometimes linger near places where Aishat and her friends sat. She would observe the way people greeted Aishat with respect, the way girls admired her confidence, the way she seemed to move through the university as though rules simply did not apply to her. To Jane, it looked like freedom. What she didn't realize was that someone else had noticed her growing interest. One afternoon, a final-year student named Prince sat with two of his friends outside the faculty building when one of them casually mentioned something that immediately caught his attention. His friend had seen Jane earlier that day. She had been walking beside Aishat. Prince didn't like the sound of that. Unlike most students, he had never admired Aishat. Something about her presence had always made him uncomfortable, though he had never been able to explain exactly why. He had heard the rumors, like everyone else, and while others laughed them off as gossip, Prince had never been able to shake the feeling that there was something darker behind them. That evening, when Jane returned to their family house near the campus, Prince confronted her. Not angrily at first, just cautiously. He warned her about the type of people who like to surround themselves with admiration. He reminded her that university life could sometimes be deceptive, that not everyone who looked successful or glamorous was someone worth trusting. But Jane reacted the way younger siblings often do when they feel controlled. She brushed off his concerns. To her, Prince sounded paranoid. She insisted Aishat was simply popular and misunderstood, just another victim of campus gossip created by jealous students. The conversation ended the way most arguments between siblings end, with frustration and silence. But Prince walked away from that conversation feeling deeply uneasy, because instincts rarely lie. Meanwhile, Jane continued spending more time around Aishat. At first, Aishat didn't show much interest. She observed from a distance, quietly studying the way Jane behaved, the way she carried herself, the way she seemed eager but cautious at the same time. Aishat was patient. She never rushed decisions like that. Eventually, one evening as students gathered outside the hostels after lectures, Aishat approached Jane directly for the first time. The invitation came casually. A night out. Just something simple. A chance for Jane to finally experience the lifestyle she had been admiring from afar. To Jane, it felt like a moment she had secretly been waiting for. She agreed without hesitation. That night, Jane left campus with Aishat, and just like the girls before her, she won't return home. At first, Prince assumed she had simply stayed over with friends to study. It wasn't unusual for students to lose track of time during night class. But when the following morning came and Jane still hadn't returned, the uneasiness in her chest began to grow. By evening, his instinct had turned into something much heavier: fear. He called her phone repeatedly, but it was off. Prince began asking questions. He spoke to some of her classmates, but none of them had seen her since the previous night. Eventually, someone mentioned the last place she had been seen, walking beside Aishat, the same name that had followed every disappearance on campus. This time, the rumors no longer felt distant stories. They felt personal. And Prince knew that waiting for answers was no longer an option. If Jane had truly followed Aishat into whatever life she secretly lived beyond campus, then Prince was going to follow them too, no matter where it led. That night, Prince positioned himself near the area where Aishat usually met the small circle of girls who followed her around campus. From a distance, he waited, leaning against a parked motorcycle as students moved in and out of the hostels. It didn't take long before he saw her. Aishat appeared just after sunset, dressed as confidently as ever, walking toward the gate with 3 other girls beside her. Some looked like freshers, excited, slightly nervous, but clearly thrilled to be included in whatever plans Aishat had for the night. Prince stayed back, careful not to draw attention. When the 4 of them entered a waiting car, he quickly climbed onto his motorcycle and followed from a distance. The drive took them far beyond the usual places students went for nightlife. They passed the crowded clubs near campus. They passed the busy restaurants filled with music and laughter. Eventually, the car entered one of the wealthier parts of the city, where tall buildings and gated houses stood behind high walls and security cameras. Prince slowed his motorcycle as he watched the car stop outside a large, brightly lit mansion. The gates opened immediately. Someone had clearly been expecting them. From where he stood across the street, Prince watched as Aishat stepped out of the car with the other girls. Moments later, a well-dressed older woman appeared at the entrance of the mansion. Even from a distance, Prince could see the way the woman carried herself, with authority, with control, like someone used to running things. She invited the girls inside. Prince waited. Nearly an hour passed before more cars began arriving. Expensive vehicles filled with wealthy elderly men in suits and designer clothing. They entered the mansion one after another. The atmosphere around the place felt less like a home and more like a carefully organized event. Prince felt a cold realization forming in his chest. Something illegal was happening inside that building, and Jane might be part of it. Hours later, the lights inside the mansion began to dim as the cars slowly left the property. One by one, the wealthy visitors disappeared into the night. Prince expected Aisha to come out again, but she didn't. Instead, a smaller van arrived at the gate. When the gates opened again, Prince moved closer on foot, staying within the shadows of the quiet streets. He watched as several girls were escorted out of the mansion. They looked different now. Gone were the excited expressions from earlier in the evening.
Their movements were slow, drained, almost mechanical. A few of them looked exhausted, their makeup smeared, their posture heavy with fatigue. The guards drove them toward another building located behind the main mansion. It was smaller, darker, and surrounded by high walls with security lights. Prince felt his stomach tighten. This was no ordinary party. Carefully, he moved closer along the side of the property until he found a position where he could climb in. When he landed, he noticed the light shining through a window. Then he decided to take a peek. Inside that room were girls, some sitting quietly on beds, some staring blankly at the floor. Prince scanned the faces desperately, and then he saw her. Jane. She was sitting on the edge of a small bed near the window, her shoulders slumped forward, her face pale and drained of the excitement she once carried when she admired Aishat from afar. She looked exhausted, broken. For a moment, Prince couldn't move. The shock of seeing his sister trapped in that place hit him harder than anything he had imagined. But the moment passed quickly, because anger replaced it. Cold, focused anger. Prince jumped out of the building. Then he reached for his phone. He didn't call friends. He didn't try to confront anyone inside. He called the police. And when he spoke, his voice carried a calm certainty that made the situation impossible to ignore. Within an hour, the quiet street exploded with flashing lights and sirens. Police vehicles surrounded the mansion and the building behind it. Guards attempted to block the entrances, but they were quickly overpowered as officers forced their way inside. Doors were broken open. The girls were escorted out of locked rooms, some of them crying, some of them barely able to stand. Among them was Jane, wrapped in a blanket, shaking but alive. Meanwhile, officers moved quickly through the property searching for the people responsible. They found the wealthy woman who had been running the operation, and not far from her, they found Aishat, the same girl who once walked through campus like she owned it, the same girl freshers admired and followed without question. This time, however, there were no admirers, only handcuffs. After the police raid, the truth about the missing girls finally surfaced.
Brother Prince, I'm really sorry for not listening to you.
It's fine. I'm just glad you are okay.
The rumors that once sounded like gossip were now undeniable facts. Aishat had never been leading girls into a glamorous life. She had been leading them into a trap.
To my lovely viewers, I just want to advise you all to be careful out there. The world can be a really cruel place. Drop in the comments your thoughts about the story, and don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe, and click the bell icon to turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story together. Until next time, I love you guys. Bye!